Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good Thursday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with you on this 24th of July. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your latest weather information by heading to weather.gov/Alaska or arh.noaa.gov. Use your NOAA weather radio anytime or call in at call Weather Info at 1-800-472-0391. You can find information throughout your day on Twitter, on Facebook, and on YouTube, anytime on social media channels like that. The fire danger continues to stick around a little bit more in the eastern sections of the interior and parts of South Central, though that's very isolated. And with rain on the way, we'll probably snuff out that limited areas of higher fire danger. Now, you'll notice it's not over the central or western interior, or the YK, or the Seward Peninsula, or the North Slope at this point, and we don't really expect that to change much. Here's what's going on in the west. In the Bering Sea, we've got an awful lot of fog hovering in the same old places there. It's not being picked up by this particular satellite picture, but the thing to note here is the discontinuous areas of moisture across the northern Pacific that are not being fed into southwest or south central Alaska right now. Instead, we have a pretty stable area of high pressure sitting across the central and western chain that's forcing a lot of the moisture northward into eastern Siberia, and then it's traveling in through the western sections of Alaska and connecting to storms that are dropping in from the northwest over the Bering Strait and bringing in colder air. Cold enough, in fact, that places like Barrow today saw a little bit of snow, which is not really horribly unusual, but the amount of cold air that is dropping toward the Brooks Range will continue to bring that threat of snow to about 2,000 feet or so and above, to areas generally west of the Dalton Highway. So we're expecting that there's going to be at least several inches of snow there at elevation, again above 2,000 feet or so. This is not going to be for everyone, but it's a sign of some colder air that's dropping southward, and we'll see another surge probably develop in the coming days with little change in the jet stream. The visible satellite picture here shows clouds over southeastern Alaska, quite a bit of drier air east of a disturbance across the eastern Gulf and across the north. You can see kind of the pooling of cloud cover once again across the YK, Bristol Bay, and into the interior. Underneath this is a healthy dose of rainfall. And again, that's slowly moving in from the west, from the Alaska Range into south central Alaska as we head through the evening hours. Up north, plenty of cloud cover there. And again, areas of showers across the Beaufort Sea coast with pockets of fog and snow across Barrow today. Areas across the Bering Sea still looking at a dense amount of stratus and fog, though you can see some breaks in that. Some pockets there north of Adak and northwest of Unalaska to, well, just about St. Paul. Saw maybe a glimpse of the sunshine, at least for a little while today, according to our satellite view from above. One more look at the loop shows low pressure here across the Gulf. It will be the next kick of colder air, though, working southward that will give a little bit more clearing as we head into Saturday. So between now and then, if you're in southern Alaska, chances are you're going to deal with some rain. Southeast looking at more rain, and slowly seeing more sunshine across west and northwestern Alaska as we head into the beginning part of the weekend. Here's a look at the surface chart now. We have low pressure at 1,008 millibars across the north and central Gulf. Southeast still under the effects of a ridge of high pressure there. Didn't see any rain on the observations by late afternoon, but we did see some pockets of showers there across the eastern interior, becoming a little bit more steady rainfall across the Tanana Valley, including Fairbanks, and across areas just west of Cook Inlet into the Alaska Range and parts of Bristol Bay. A frontal boundary again slowly dropping southward, at times becoming stationary for maybe an hour or two, but it is on the move, and as that drops southward, that will stir up more rainfall across more places in the south as we get into tonight and tomorrow. Showers across the Beaufort Seacoast there, and again a little bit of snow around Barrow. Look for the moisture to pull up a little bit more across the north-facing slopes of the Brooks Range and become a little bit better positioned to create snowfall that could accumulate above 2,000 feet, again generally west of the Dalton Highway. Low pressure south of the Gulf of Anadyr is going to have a hard time moving eastward. That is gathering a lot of warm air coming in on the back side of the ridge here, but it's running into high pressure around the Gulf of Anadyr itself. That's at 1,022 millibars. While that works itself northward a little bit tonight, the overall ridge that's working up the west side of Alaska is pretty much holding firm there, so it doesn't have a lot to gather to move eastward. So for now, the warmer air is going to be sitting pretty much where it is. Tonight's forecast shows showers from the interior all the way down the Alaska Peninsula, especially along the higher terrain. Showers generally north and east of Kodiak Island, but expect to see some of that passing over where you are. Gulf Coast communities also looking at rain and a little bit more showery as that heads out into the open waters. Low pressure focusing on places like Eagle and Northway, dragging that cold air right up to the ridge tops, and it's going to have a hard time swinging through as a real defined cold front, but there certainly will be more of a northerly flow running down the Cook Inlet and into more southern locations as we head into tonight. Meanwhile, high pressure still sitting around Kiska at 1,022 millibars with southeast, also under the effects of a high pressure ridge, but getting the wetter side of the deal. Low pressure just east of the Alcan border by tomorrow will slowly work its way east and southeast. Again, that frontal boundary that we were looking at really never makes it over as a true cold front, but it's enough to keep the rain going throughout the day across southern Alaska, including Prince William Sound and Kodiak Island, getting a better chance for rainfall tomorrow. A front sitting just south of the Brooks Range then will keep the cold air locked up across the Brooks Range and the coastal plain, but you'll notice a little bit of a difference for Friday and again into Saturday. A wide area of downward moving air, so instead of that lift creating cloud cover, we're getting sinking air, which prevents a lot of that cloud cover from forming in any great fashion. So we should see a little more sunshine there, all the way from Barrow to Kotzebue Sound into interior parts of Norton Sound and parts of the YK, with the exceptions being some places west of Bethel out toward Nunivak Island. You're probably still under the effects of clouds and at least some showers ahead of that warmer air that's trying to build eastward. High pressure still in that same old place around Kiska, almost to Adak at 1,029 millibars, and southeast you're still looking at a pretty healthy dose of south and southwesterly winds on the west side of that ridge, and that keeps you in rain form, it looks like, as we head into Saturday. More to come there for you as well. For Prince William Sound, low pressure just south of you will keep winds relatively light, maybe 10 to 15 knots or so, out toward the valleys, the Kuskokwim Valley and the Yukon Valley. The wind should be pretty light as well, with high pressure sitting right over Norton Sound at 1,017 millibars. So once again, that warmer air is not just going to surge into western Alaska. It's pretty much parked and gathering more and more heat behind it. In fact, enough so that some of the clouds might break up a little bit more across the Bering on Saturday. So if you're out to sea there or heading out by Friday night or Saturday, you might see some improvement in the cloud cover. But of course, morning fog is certainly going to be an issue there north of the chain, as it always is. High pressure across the Arctic at 1,022 millibars, keeping more of a north and easterly flow. Pretty light there across the Beaufort Seacoast. It doesn't look like much of a change in the weather pattern overall, with the frontal boundary still hovering over the Brooks Range. Best chance of showers, though, will move a little bit further eastward by Saturday, up and down the Alcan into southeast. Wet weather continues there, and showers will gradually end from west to east along that boundary as we go through the beginning of the weekend. Temperatures today back in the upper 50s for a good part of southeastern Alaska. Juneau looking at 57 around Petersburg, all the way down toward Ketchikan and Annette. Temps were generally less than 60 degrees. Hyder was showing 63 by late afternoon, 57 in Sitka. Yakutat was 58 degrees. Prince William Sound saw temps anywhere from about 60 to the mid-50s around Cordova today. 60 in Anchorage by late afternoon with clouds building in. 57 in Kenai, 59 in Homer, and low 60s there for Seward. Heading up the road toward Talkeetna, temperatures were in the upper 50s, almost 60 degrees by 4 o'clock, 55 around Fairbanks, upper 60s for Eagle and Northway, with Fort Yukon at 59, about the same there in Kodiak as well. Northward, the Brooks Range were in the 30s and 40s, but you can see where the cool air was and where it wasn't. On the north side of the slope, those temperatures were in the 30s and 40s there. Around Arctic Village, only 50 degrees, but considerably warmer than neighbors to the north. Again, 59 at Fort Yukon, 55 or 54 in Ambler. Bettle's looking at temperatures a little bit cooler there. The Arctic coast again in the 30s and 40s with snow in Barrow once again at 34. Kotzebue Sound saw temperatures in the mid to upper 40s by and large. Kotzebue was looking at certainly milder conditions than neighbors all the way up toward Point Hope and Point Lay. 43 around the western tip of the Seward Peninsula with Nome at 57. Once you got into Norton Sound, temperatures were a little bit cooler there around Unalakleet. 54 degrees around Grayling and McGrath, 58 in Bethel with temperatures closer to Iliamna, a little bit shy of 50 degrees this afternoon. St. Lawrence Island was 48. Bristol Bay temps were in the 50s and 60s with the Pribilofs in the mid-50s. The Alaska Peninsula also hovering on either side of the 60-degree mark, but Sandpoint notably warmer there at 61. And lower 50s there for Shemya, Adak, and Atka. Atka coming in at 52. Overnight low temps then in the lower 50s for southeast. South Central also looking at 50 to about 53 degrees or so. Prince William Sound close to 50 degrees. The interior upper 40s tonight. North of the Yukon Valley generally in the upper 30s, so cooler air is starting to work its way southward again. The Brooks Range at or below freezing in some cases. The Arctic coast also along with you there nearing that freezing point. Nome looking at 36, Bethel 43, Bristol Bay temps at or just below 50 degrees, as is Kodiak in upper 40s for the Aleutians, with high temps there tomorrow in the upper 50s. The Alaska Peninsula probably in the lower 60s tomorrow. Bethel looking at 60 degrees, 48 and cooler for Nome, with Kotzebue Sound temperatures also cooler than 50 degrees, upper 30s at best for the Arctic coast. The interior still hovering in the mid to upper 50s. South Central probably closer to 60 degrees with rain in the forecast, and upper 50s to about 60 for southeast again as rain starts to move back in. Flying weather, as you would imagine, under increased rain chances will drop to IFR for a large part of southeast tomorrow and the Alcan border, as well as areas east of Barrow along the coastal plain. Across the west and the Bering, fog conditions will continue with IFR all the way from the western tip of the Aleutians to the central and eastern Aleutians, with some MVFR in the middle and some improvement there for the west coast all the way from Kotzebue Sound through the lower Yukon Valley and Bristol Bay, with some improvements noted around Kodiak as well. But passes may be an issue, especially in the north, with Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass both expected to be IFR for your Friday. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass will likely see some improvement during the day. It will start on the west side and then gradually work its way into the east side, but it may be slow on the east. Rainy Pass MVFR trending toward VFR conditions, same issue there. Windy Pass probably MVFR through it most of the day, and we may see things lean over toward MVFR and Isabel Pass with a chance for thunderstorms as well. Mentasta Pass also looking at a threat of convection for your Friday. Tanita Pass will watch for towering Q and thunderstorms there in the day. MVFR conditions should be expected. And Porter's Pass also expected to be MVFR through most of your Friday. If there's rain, that visibility could drop, and we do expect it to drop in Chilkoot and White Pass for your Friday afternoon. Freezing level shows the upper level trough of low pressure and dragging that cold into the northern parts of Alaska. The surface freezing line right over the Brooks Range. Here's your 2,000-foot freezing line there, and again, that's generally what we're talking about for snow, generally west of the Dalton Highway at elevation in the Brooks Range for tonight and into tomorrow. Otherwise, much warmer weather out across the Bering. In fact, freezing levels there as high as 14,000 feet, so there's still plenty of summer left. Icing potential above 7 but below 12,000 feet for the eastern part of Alaska tomorrow. Most of that still light to isolated moderate. And I got that a little backwards, didn't I? Above 8,000 feet but below 13,000 feet for some parts of southeastern Alaska and also west of the Seward Peninsula, generally below 12,000 feet there. Most of that, again, pretty isolated. Here's a jet stream, and we're still looking at a very pronounced trough of low pressure across Alaska. As such, and with little movement expected in that for now, we'll keep that heat that we saw there, the freezing levels with those levels of 14,000 feet or so, and we'll keep that cold across the northern parts of Alaska with the surface freezing line and 2,000-foot freezing levels right there across the northern parts of Alaska and the Arctic coast. We've also got the main core of the jet stream situated generally south of Alaska at this point, so any big storms that are coming out of the Pacific are going to bypass us, and we're just dealing with weather coming generally out of the north and the west. What that does for us is it limits the amount of moisture moving through the interior, the west and southwestern Alaska, but it still gathers up enough moisture there coming in from the eastern Gulf that you folks in southeastern Alaska are still getting your fair share. Looks like northwesterlies will be the rule of the day for the Chukchi Seacoast. Wind speeds there up to 10 to 20 knots. Light winds generally on the east side of this pattern for eastern Alaska, only about 5 to 10 knots if that. And the northwesterlies are coming through Kodiak Island, Bristol Bay, and the YK. around 20 to 25 knots. High pressure is in command out across the southern parts of the Bering at 15 knots, with westerlies becoming a little bit more southerly as you get into the extreme western parts of the Aleutians, and a little bit of a faster flow here across Sitka up to Juneau and the Lynn Canal between 15 and 35 knots. At 3,000 feet, the pattern is exactly the same. The speeds may change somewhat, anywhere from 5 to about 10 knots or so across the north and west. And you're looking at more of a northwesterly flow here coming across Sand Point, Cold Bay, and False Pass, about 15 or 20 knots. Things slow down a little bit closer to high pressure, as you would imagine. And across the west, 25 to 35 knots for the western Bering. Now, low pressure is a little bit slower here at this level, 3,000 feet. You're still looking at about 5 to 10 knots wind coming around southern Alaska, and otherwise southeastern Alaska is looking at about 10 to 25 knots from the south and southeast. Turbulence potential then is somewhat limited, but we do see that threat increasing a little bit tomorrow for central and southern parts of southeast during the day. Expect this to work its way northward as that low pressure system gradually meanders eastward. It's a really slow process, but it does look like it creates a little bit of shear and some light to isolated moderate turbulence possible for the central and southern parts of southeast all the way through the Dixon Entrance and into Haida Gwaii. Also, with that northwesterly flow coming across the eastern Aleutians and parts of the Alaska Peninsula, watch for at least a little bit of chop there, generally below 3,000 feet in bays and passes. So the rest of Alaska, as far as turbulence goes, should be pretty limited, if at all. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back with another update on today's Sea Ice Edge and, of course, your marine weather. Stay tuned.
It's just a phase I'm going through. Part 2. Welcome to Stargazers. I'm James Albury, director of the Kika Silva Plow Planetarium in Gainesville, Florida.
And I'm Dean Regas, astronomer for the Cincinnati Observatory. You may remember that 2 weeks ago, I asked James a question about what phase the moon would be in if it rose at noon.
Yep, I got it right too.
Yes, you did. So, ready for another one?
Sure.
Okay, if the moon sets at noon, what phase is it in?
Oh, another easy one. It would be at last quarter.
Right again.
Thank you, thank you. So, how did I know that?
He's a witch, he's a witch.
No, not really. But we'll show you how I answered that question, and we have a really cool Mars moon and Saturn moon scoochie next week as well. Let's show you. When we talked 2 weeks ago about the phases of the moon, we mentioned that it takes about a week for the moon to go from one major phase to the next. For example, if the moon is in the new phase on July 26th, it will be at first quarter on August 4th.
When the moon is at first quarter, it's traveled a quarter of the way around the Earth, and therefore it's 90 degrees east of the sun in the sky. So the moon rises just as the sun is reaching its highest point in the sky at noon.
Then, a week after that, on August 10th, the moon is in its full phase, and it's 180 degrees away from the sun. This means that the moon will rise as the sun sets, and it will set as the sun rises. In the days following the full moon, we begin to see less and less of the daytime side of the moon and more of the nighttime side. These are called the waning phases. Waning means to get smaller, and the moon is appearing humped again, so we call this the waning gibbous moon.
On August 17th, it will have been a week since the full moon, which is now 3 weeks after the new moon. The moon has traveled 3/4 of the way around the Earth, so we call this phase last quarter. We again see half of the daylit side and half of the nighttime side, but reversed from what we saw at first quarter on August 4th. The moon is also visible in the early morning instead of the early evening.
In this configuration, the moon is now 270 degrees east of the sun, or, less confusingly, 90 degrees west of the sun. So when the sun is at its highest point in the sky at noon, the moon will be setting on the western horizon.
Lastly, we have the waning crescent phase. This occurs during the last week of the moon's orbit around the Earth, and we see the daylit side shrink more and more as the days pass.
On August 25th, 29 days after the beginning of the moon's journey, the moon is back where it started, in a position putting it between the Earth and the sun. The moon is new once again.
All right, with that said, let's check out our moon planet scoochies. Okay, we have our skies set up for Friday, August 1st, just after sunset facing southwest. You'll see a waxing crescent moon just to the right of Spica, the brightest star in the constellation Virgo the Maiden. If you notice, the Moon, Spica, Mars, and Saturn form an almost straight line in the sky, leading you towards Scorpius the Scorpion.
Advancing time one day to Saturday, August 2nd, you'll see the waxing crescent moon snuggled nicely between the red planet Mars and the bright star Spica. Mars is the reddish, non-twinkling light to the moon's left, and Spica will be the bright blue twinkling light to the moon's right.
Then, on the following evening, Sunday, August 3rd, the moon has moved another 13 degrees in the sky, placing it between the ring planet Saturn and the Roman god of war, Mars.
Lastly, let's advance time one more day to Monday, August 4th, and we now have a first quarter moon, just to the east of our celestial trio. So, let's run through that again. Friday, August 1st, Saturday, August 2nd, Sunday, August 3rd, and Monday, August 4th.
Oh, and by the way, around lunchtime, check out the eastern horizon on Monday, August 4th. Guess what you'll see?
The moon!
Exactly. Keep looking up.
And the latest analysis of the sea ice edge over the Beaufort and Chukchi seacoast shows there is still plenty of ice north of Prudhoe Bay to Dead Horse, up toward Barrow, and almost to Wainwright there. A lot of this is being pushed together, so the concentrations here are a little bit thicker than what you'll find out here across the edges, of course. And most of this is not shorefast, or all of it is not shorefast at that point, but there's still plenty of ice there east of Wainwright. And also now east of Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse, so not quite clear just yet. Here's a look at southeastern Alaska. Winds remain pretty light around the Lynn Canal, becoming southerly, about 10 knots there with a 2-foot sea, otherwise 4 to 5-foot seas through the Frederick Sound and Stevens Passage region, 25 knots as you get down into the Clarence Strait with a 5-foot sea again. Coastal waters looking at 15 to 25 knots, more of an easterly flow in the north, more of a south and southeasterly flow in the south. 8-foot seas there as you approach the Dixon entrance on Friday. For Saturday, southeasterlies will be the predominant flow across the central and southern parts of the inner waterways, also the coast, looking at 25 knots with 7 to 8-foot seas there. A stronger easterly wind blowing offshore south of Yakutat to the northern entrances there. Otherwise, southerlies continue in the Lynn Canal with a 2-foot sea and 4 to 5-foot seas there across the southern inner waterways with winds still running around 20 to 25 knots. Across south central, light and variable flow for the Prince William Sound inside Cook Inlet in the north. A little bit more southerly south of Kenai. Westerlies coming into the Barren Islands, becoming light and variable in the western Gulf with a northeasterly wind outside of Seward and Resurrection Bay. More easterly winds across the northern Gulf. Otherwise variable flow east of Kodiak Island and a westerly wind coming off of the Alaska Range and into Shelikof Strait with a 15-knot wind and 3-foot seas there. For Saturday, you can see what happens after that disturbance starts to work through. We get more of a northerly wind coming off the continent and blowing through Cook Inlet, 10 knots or so, picking up speed a little bit west of the Barrens and into Shelikof Strait. 3-foot seas there. Variable flow east of the Barrens, a northerly wind east of Kodiak with 15 knots there in the western Gulf, and east and northeasterly winds still rounding low pressure sitting right across the central parts of the Gulf with 4 to 5-foot seas there across some parts of the northern Gulf and 3 to 4-foot seas a little bit further south. Inside Prince William Sound, still looking at a light easterly wind, 2-foot seas there expected on 10 knots. Northeasterlies inside of Bristol Bay for Friday in the Alaska Peninsula. Northwesterlies coming across the peninsula, still light around 10 knots with a 7-foot sea, but look what happens here on the eastern side and south, 25 knots with a 5 to 6-foot sea. And by Saturday, all winds become a little bit more diminished, 10 to 15-knot winds expected with a northwesterly wind for all, 3 to 5-foot seas north of the peninsula, south of the peninsula. In the Pacific, 3 to 4-foot seas are expected to start up the weekend. Across the Aleutians, southerly winds on the west side of the ridge, 15 knots with a 3 to 6-foot sea there from Kiska out toward Attu. Northwesterlies on the east side of the ridge with 15 knots, 3, 5, 6-foot seas there in the Bering, and 4 to 5-foot seas across the Pacific with more of an easterly flow on the Pacific side of Adak and Atka. As we head into Saturday, we get more of a southeasterly wind across Kiska and Attu, 4 to 6-foot seas there. Light and variable winds around 10 knots from Atka east over Atka and Adak and south into the Pacific. More of a northwesterly flow for Unalaska and south into the Pacific there with 3 to maybe 5 foot seas at most. Generally, the higher seas will be in the Pacific side for Saturday. And then as you move into the west coast, you'll notice a southerly flow there, 15 to about 20 knots from St. Lawrence Island north of Nunivak Island and the St. Matthew Island waters. Those looking at 4 to 9 foot seas, generally east of St. Matthew itself. Variable light flow around the Pribilofs with a 5 foot sea, and northerlies south of Nunivak Island in the Kuskokwim Bay with a 5 foot sea for Friday. That becomes a little more northwesterly by Saturday. Winds are light and variable north of Nunivak Island, but we're still looking for 5 foot seas there. And expect a southwesterly wind over the St. Matthew Island waters with 9 foot seas on 25 knots. The Pribilofs looking at a northwesterly flow up to 15 knots with a 5 foot sea for the weekend. For Friday in the Arctic coast, northerly still coming into Barrow, light at 10 knots, north and westerly winds for the Beaufort Sea coast at 15 knots, and easterlies moving off of Cape Lisburne and Point Hope at 10 knots, with Kotzebue Sound looking at 10 knots and 3 foot seas. For Saturday, that reverses course and goes southerly, 20 knots there with a 4 foot sea. Easterlies for the Chukchi Sea coast, 15 knots with a 3 foot sea, and light east and northeasterly winds blowing onshore with 1 to 2 foot seas there. Some of that again over the ice. Recapping tonight's weather, colder air is dropping into the coastal plain in the Arctic coast. With that, we expect snow levels to drop to about 2,000 feet, generally west of the Dalton Highway. Several inches of snow should be expected there. Some of that will be mixing with rain this evening and becoming snow as we head into the overnight hours. Showers generally winding down from west to east. That'll be the trend as we head through the weekend for the interior, but the process may be slow if you're in the Tanana Valley and along the Alcan, and showers are setting in for southern parts of Alaska, including the Susitna and Matanuska valleys, the Anchorage general vicinity there, all the way down the Alaska Range, and into southeastern Alaska. Rain should start to move back in as we head through tonight, with high pressure still in command out across the Bering, creating widespread fog. Look for cold air to slowly move southward, with periods of rain continuing throughout the day in southern Alaska and southeast, with a little bit of a decrease in cloud cover and rain from west to east by Saturday. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.